On this Sunday night, the Russian president's defiance. Condemnation over Vladimir Putin's top-secret trip deep inside war-torn Ukraine. Plus, the planned show of support by Putin's biggest ally. Mega prison criticism. The increased intake as El Salvador extends its state of emergency. The ripple effect of kindness for refugees.
This year changed all of our life.
How a note between two moms with very different lives helped change others.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We begin tonight with the bold and defiant move by the Russian president deep inside Russian-occupied territory in war-torn Ukraine for the very first time since his full-scale invasion. Under the cover of darkness, Vladimir Putin drove through the streets of Mariupol, the city that saw the worst atrocities Russian forces in Ukraine are accused of to date. Yesterday, Putin traveled to Crimea to mark the 9th anniversary of the Black Sea region's annexation from Ukraine. These visits are the closest Putin has ever been to the front lines of this war and come just days after the International Criminal Court issued a warrant for his arrest. And as Redmond Shannon reports, hours ahead of his most important ally's visit to Moscow.
Vladimir Putin going for a drive around Mariupol, a city obliterated by his 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The Russian media footage also shows Putin meeting people purported to be construction workers at a new residential development. Ukraine has compared the visit to that of a criminal returning to the scene of his crime. The UN estimates 90% of the buildings in the port city were damaged last year. Ukraine says 20,000 civilians were killed. An Associated Press analysis estimated 600 alone died when this theatre, used as a bomb shelter, was hit. On Saturday, Russian TV showed Putin in Crimea's largest city, the region occupied exactly 9 years ago in Russia's first invasion of Ukraine. The two visits come in the days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin on charges of unlawful deportation of Ukrainian children, and as his forces continue the brutal battle for the small city of Bakhmut.
What you try to do if you're Putin is those who are still with you, you try to give the image which says, look, we still have this, quote, success in at least part of Ukraine.
Putin will also want to put on a positive image ahead of Monday's visit to Moscow of China's Xi Jinping. The two countries have a so-called no-limits partnership, but Beijing has stopped short of supplying heavy weapons to Putin.
Until China does that, I think you can say that they are balancing. China is taking more of a global diplomatic role. We saw this when they brokered the Saudi-Iranian resumption of relations only a few days ago.
The number one point on China's proposed peace plan is that territorial integrity be respected. But it doesn't demand that Russia's troops withdraw from Ukraine. Xi's words in Moscow will be closely watched, as will his actions afterwards. It has been reported that he will follow the visit with a phone call to Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
As the Ukraine war rages on, another batch of Canadian battle tanks have been prepped and are now on the way to the front lines. New Defense Force video uploaded to social media shows a handful of Leopard 2 tanks being loaded onto a plane bound for Europe. Ottawa has announced it will donate 8 Leopard 2 tanks to help Kyiv. The Trudeau government has also pledged to send about 8,000 rounds of artillery ammunition and 12 air defense missiles, all part of a $1 billion Canadian commitment to Ukraine. In Quebec, the number of missing from that apartment fire in Old Montreal is now up to at least 7 people. Today, crews began slowly dismantling the building as investigators begin the painstaking process of sifting through the charred wreckage, believing more victims are likely buried under the debris. An arson team is investigating, but has been unable to take a closer look because of potentially unsafe conditions. To Ottawa now, as the opposition ramps up pressure on the government over alleged foreign interference in our elections, the Conservatives are also putting the country's healthcare problems back in the spotlight. At a press conference today, leader Pierre Poilievre proposed a new policy to resolve staffing shortages and to help lessen the burden on overwhelmed healthcare workers across the country. Our Mackenzie Gray joins us from Ottawa with more. Mackenzie, healthcare is likely going to play a large role in the next election. So what's this new proposal about?
Well, Farah, Pierre Poilievre spends a lot of time saying Canada's broken, and at the top of his list is the healthcare system. But today he made a rare policy proposal to try and fix it, and let's go through it. He's calling for a Blue Seal national accreditation program to let doctors, nurses, and other healthcare professionals work in whatever province they want. And it sounds like a simple solution, but right now in a number of provinces, the only way you can work in them is if you're accredited to work in that province, even if you're a graduate of a Canadian institution. Now, the only way the Poilievre plan will work if he gets the provinces on board, and he says he's confident they'll be able to come to an agreement.
Our Blue Seal for professions will be strictly voluntary, and the provinces will have an incentive to join.
And Mackenzie, Poilievre was asked about a big vote in the House of Commons next week on Chinese electoral interference. What's the Conservative strategy on this?
Yeah, Farah, the Poilievre play on this one is to try and get Katie Telford, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, to testify at the House Ethics Committee about what she knows about Chinese electoral interference.
We call on the Prime Minister to stop the cover-up. If he's got nothing to hide, why doesn't he allow his Chief of Staff to come and tell the truth?
And the reason the Conservatives opted for a full House vote is because the Liberals have been filibustering for nearly 24 hours at another House committee to avoid having Telford to speak. But hearing from Ms. Telford could shed some more light on what the Prime Minister's office knew about the alleged interference. Justin Trudeau's former National Security Advisor, Dick Fadden, has said that the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff is someone who's normally made aware of serious national security matters.
More often than not, unless it's an extraordinarily detailed and sensitive material, a number of people from PMO would sit in. I think in most instances, the Chief of Staff would sit in any event.
And it's not just the Conservatives that want Telford to testify, Farah. The NDP and Bloc are also on side with their motion. So it appears the opposition parties do have the votes to compel Telford to speak.
We'll be watching what happens next week. Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. Health Canada has issued more warnings this month about the health risks linked to unauthorized skin-lightening products. Now, here's the thing. It's not the first time these creams and toners by Philippine brand Brilliant Skin Essentials have been pulled from the shelves. Neetu Garcha looks at why the products keep returning despite the potentially toxic ingredients inside.
Advertising, the whiter your skin, the beautiful you are.
When Ontario resident Jenny Toretta was a teenager growing up in the Philippines, she says she felt pressured to lighten her skin. She no longer uses them, but for nearly 10 years, Toretta says she spent thousands on whitening products like soaps, lotions, pills, and injections.
It's still very rampant in the Philippines, the whitening products.
Promoting global racism and colorism.
In the West, many skincare giants have rebranded, promising to stop using terms like whitening and fairness. Amina Mire, who's been researching the industry for more than 2 decades, is calling for explicit legislation in Canada.
Cosmetic promotion, cosmetic marketing of product that actually explicitly say it lightens or whitens the skin. There is no legal statute for that.
In Health Canada's latest warning, various health products promoted for lightening skin sold in Alberta by Philippine brand Brilliant Skin Essentials were removed from the warehouse location and from online sale due to potentially dangerous ingredients and ingredients not listed on the label.
The two agents in question are tretinoin cream as well as hydroquinone. So when these people are trying to bleach their face and they're using copious amount of tretinoin, and in a worst case scenario, if they become pregnant and they continue to use those agents, they can harm their fetus.
There have been multiple Health Canada advisories for the brand since January. Some industry experts say it's because the massive skin whitening industry has developed a new and clever niche in marketing the products.
We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of global market that has no legal statute whatsoever.
Toretta says her message is to encourage people to embrace their individual and natural beauty, the way she wishes she had. Neetu Garcha, Global News.
A shotgun bank merger was announced this afternoon in Europe to avoid further market turmoil in global banking. Swiss bank UBS has agreed to buy smaller rival Credit Suisse for $4.4 billion Canadian. The Swiss banking marriage follows efforts in Europe and the United States to support the sector since the collapse of 3 U.S. banks last week. Spring break beaches threatened by a giant blob of seaweed. Coming up, where it will hit and when. Beachfronts in Florida could be smothered by a toxic blob of seaweed taking aim at the Gulf of Mexico. The blob is known as the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt and is twice the width of the entire United States. Sargassum isn't just unsightly for beachgoers, it can wreak havoc on ecosystems and it can even be harmful to humans. There are no shortage of ways to describe how terrible of a disease dementia can be. The risk is especially more precarious for women, as data shows they're more likely to be affected than men. But while people may not think too much can be done to prevent it, there's a Canadian nonprofit that's focused on women's brain health, and it's launched a new app aimed at giving them a better fighting chance. Catherine Ward explains.
It's the awareness that I have now.
46-year-old Kathy Colitis is a busy mom to 2 young boys. Recently, she has become more conscious of taking care of herself, and specifically her brain.
I think it just hits home that it is a very strong possibility that something could happen to me as a woman, especially in knowing what the stats are.
Colitis is referring to the likelihood of dementia and Alzheimer's.
Almost 70% of Alzheimer's sufferers are women, and women suffer from other brain aging diseases like stress, anxiety, depression twice as much as men.
Experts with women's brain health initiatives say the damage often occurs long before people realize what's happening.
Most people with late onset of Alzheimer's disease, they tend to show symptoms in their 70s and 80s, sometimes their 90s. But what the science is now showing is that by the time symptoms occur, it's likely that the damage has happened 20 to 25 years prior.
In December, the organization launched a new BrainFit app to help women focus on setting goals and making choices.
We've already had over 10,000 downloads, which for an app like this is outstanding.
The app has people choose goals or habits in different areas related to brain health. Then it tracks the progress.
It will send you a little reminder, and then you check off that you drank the water that you said you were going to.
There are also support tools, including videos and articles. Colitis says for her, the motivation to keep going is twofold, with the long-term results top of mind.
My goal is to build on what I've started and to maintain it because I want to be a healthy mom for my kids.
The emotional toll on society is huge, on the community, and the financial cost to the healthcare system is going to just swamp it. So we need to do whatever we can.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Ahead, more inmates flood El Salvador's Mega prison. The widespread support in the country and the mounting criticism from the outside. In Ecuador and Peru, at least 15 people are dead after a magnitude 6.8 earthquake shook both countries this weekend. Search and rescue efforts are underway for survivors trapped under the rubble of collapsed homes, many of which did not meet building standards for the quake-prone country. According to officials, there is no threat of the disaster being followed by a tsunami, despite the tremors hitting near Ecuador's coast. In El Salvador, the population of the country's new mega prison is growing. A second group of 2,000 inmates were transferred to the facility this week. It's built to house 40,000 prisoners. As Mike Armstrong explains, while the Salvadorian government insists the compound is needed for its war on gangs, critics say the crackdown comes with a cost.
They are images the Salvadoran government wants seen. The transfer of inmates from one prison to a new one. Its official name is CICOT, the Spanish abbreviation for Terrorism Confinement Center. The transfer was filmed and released by the government, along with a message from the Justice Minister. He calls the men terrorist gang leaders and says they'll never be back on the streets. The seaweed facility is spread over 410 acres, about 80 kilometers from the capital. It has 8 cell blocks, each with 50 cells. They'll be cramped. Each cell is set to house 100 inmates with only 80 bunks and just 2 sinks and 2 toilets. The president of neighboring Colombia said earlier this month the images of the prison gave him chills and called it a concentration camp.
El campo de concentración del Salvador.
Now, El Salvador insists it needed the new space for its crackdown on crime. After 87 people were killed in gang violence in just a few days in March of last year, the government declared a state of emergency. It suspended some rights, including the right to a lawyer, and increased the amount of time people can be held without being charged. Over the last year, more than 65,000 people have been rounded up. The government is set to extend the anti-gang measures. And the head of the National Police says it's needed to continue the fight. Well, human rights groups say hundreds of innocent people have been swept up and dozens have died in police custody. One local group says it's documented more than 3,300 human rights abuses. Now, that doesn't mean the measures haven't been popular. Murders in 2022 dropped 57% from the year before. Walls that would have been covered in gang markings are being painted over. A poll last month pegged support for the state of emergency at 92%. There's more security, this mechanic says. I can walk with my young children. Before, I didn't even take them out. El Salvador already led the world in the number of prisoners per capita. The new facility is pushing it further into the lead. It now has an estimated 2% of its entire population behind bars. Mike Armstrong, Global News.
Next, how a note from one mom to another started a friendship and a cycle of kindness for Ukrainian refugees. As the war in Ukraine rages on, the number of applications from Ukrainians wanting to come here to Canada has now surpassed 900,000. And there is still a great need for host families. One mom in Calgary and her family have managed to help over 30 Ukrainian newcomer families in the past year. And those newcomers have kept the kindness going. Carolyn Curry de Castillo reports.
On the day the war started, Anne Kucherava and her husband and 3 kids were away from their home in Dnipro, just a week-long trip to the mountains. They had no idea they would not come home again.
We don't have stuff, we don't have clothes, we don't have stuff, because we are going to mountain, we think only 1 week, and we never come back.
They stayed in the Czech Republic for 3 months before coming to Calgary, where they didn't know anyone. Anne's daughter came home from school one day with a note from a mom named Tammy who wanted to help.
She started help for us. She started with things, with everything for necessary for newcomer, for people, for new family here.
Tammy Brigadier found there's a lot of support you can give without being a host family. She's been able to collect donations and help with documents and driving. She uses her connections to assist newcomers navigate new surroundings and has helped host gatherings that bring Ukrainians and Canadians together.
Something that seems relatively small on our end will have a massive impact. Like, they have a bit of a running chance now of making it.
Anne says the support she got from Tammy and her family's been a huge help. Her English is so good now that she works at a local registry's office where she assists other new arrivals get their documents.
I am explaining the rules. Many people even don't understand how. Right, Calgary. I help and I feel useful now.
Tammy has helped over 30 families now. She says it's a lot of work, but rewarding.
I think that it will be a lifelong lesson for my kids to see the ripple effects of being kind and compassionate. I've had an opportunity to meet all of these really wonderful people.
I just miss for my mama.
Anne says she worries for her mom back in Dnipro, but knowing her kids are safe and surrounded by people who care makes all the difference.
We think about this year changed all of our life, but we're happy here now.
Carolyn Curry de Castillo, Global News.
The kindness of strangers. That's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your Sunday evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Banff, Alberta, and we love seeing your Canada, so please email us your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Donna will be back with you tomorrow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.